Hi everyone! Today I have a new book to show you. It's our book that we are reading at Girl Talk Apologetics, and we just talked about it. And I wanted to share with you some of my thoughts and takeaways from chapter 1. This book in particular is really interesting because the author comes with a homicide detective perspective approach to apologetics. And I can't go into details about the whole chapter, but you should just know that the beginning of chapter 1 starts off with a crime scene of a woman that was murdered. And so there is an older detective, more experienced, named Alan, and the author is coming alongside of him. And so they are trying to figure out who the crime suspect is. And Alan considers the evidence rather quickly, makes a few assumptions, and they come up with a wrong suspect. Later on, they find out who the real suspect is, but I just want to share that so that what I'm going to share makes more sense. I'm going to go over a few concepts that came up in this chapter. In the beginning of chapter 1, as I already mentioned, Detective Allen had presuppositions that were wrong and affected the way he interpreted the evidence. In page 26, Wallace says, "All of us hold presuppositions that can impact the way we see the world around us." So, what is a presupposition? Something that is assumed beforehand at the beginning of a line of argument or course of action, and it is assumed in such a way that is understood without being openly expressed. Which is why I think presuppositions are sometimes not so obvious to spot unless you pay close attention. Sometimes, for example, apologetics and apologists are not viewed too well by some. We hear things like apologetics is designed to keep people in the faith and is dishonest. This type of claim presupposes that Christianity is not true, and so they think that anything that is taught is dishonest because it is untrue. Notice it is not blatantly said in the actual statement itself, but more in between the lines. If you were to ask people that think these things about apologetics, you might find out that they have a similar philosophy to the people mentioned by Wallace in this chapter. People like homicide investigators, scientists, historians, which some of them presuppose a particular philosophy called philosophical naturalism or philosophical materialism. People that hold that kind of philosophy believe that only natural laws and forces operate in the world and not supernatural forces. They believe nothing exists beyond the natural realm. This is a skewed way to investigate if Christianity is true, because you are beginning your investigation by presupposing the thing that you want to find out, if it is true, is not true, and it will affect the way you interpret the evidence, similar to how the detective Allen did. In page 26, it says, "We had already decided where the evidence would lead and were simply looking for affirmation." But is that what we Christians are doing as well as we look into apologetics? Well, let's think about that. Christians, like non-Christians, can look at the same evidence. Something happened, namely Christianity. Apologetics simply maintains that Christianity is the best explanation given the evidence. Another concept that comes up is known as begging the question. On page 29, we read, "It was as if we were asking the question, did her husband kill her, as opposed to who killed her?" The detectives were starting the investigation believing that there were no other suspects other than her husband. Another question presented is something that the author used to ask when he was an atheist. The question is, does a supernatural being exist? Versus asking, does God exist? Wallace, as an atheist, was starting his question by including his philosophy that the supernatural does not exist. As Wallace put it on page 29, this is the truest definition of bias, isn't it? Starting off with your mind already made up. So what does begging the question mean? It's when we smuggle our conclusions into our investigation by beginning with them as an initial premise. When we beg the question, we might end up with conclusions that match our presuppositions rather than reflect the truth of the matter. It's like we tamper with our own investigation. On page 30, Wallace says, it's possible to have a prior opinion, yet leave this presupposition at the door in order to examine the evidence fairly. It's important to consider the evidence in such a way that we pursue truth and don't hang on to lies that the investigation brings to light. This is why I personally don't believe that apologists are dishonest, because they are often the first to point out when something that was said in the past was wrong. So even as Christians, we can leave our presuppositions at the door and look at the evidence and pursue truth. And I just want to end with this quote found on page 31 that says, I am open to following the evidence wherever it leads, even if it points to the existence of a miraculous designer. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And feel free to share this video with someone you think would like to hear it. Hey Patreons, I am here in the process of finishing recording today's video.